Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Team Tuesday this week with Tanzil Choudhury. Hi, Tanzil. Welcome back.
Hey, Vasco. Good to be back.
So, Tanzil, on Tuesdays, we talk about teams. But before we dive into that, we always ask, because obviously we learn a lot from books, what was the book that most influenced you in your career as a Scrum Master?
So I believe, Vasco, different stage of my career, different book had played different key part of my growth. One of the book I can really connect back and look back where had, one of the most influence on me is by John Maxwell, Everyone Communicates, Few Connects. That is one of the book I look back and I feel I have learned a lot. And not only that, every time I go back and read that, I pick up items, what I can practice and improve myself.
And if you had to pick one aspect of what you learned from that book that you would recommend for other Scrum Masters to go back and look for, what would that be?
So I think that book allowed me to look beyond the process. As I came and looked into, learned about Scrum and Agile, I took that framework to heart, and I don't think so I did anything wrong at that stage, but my Agile mindset did not kick in. And I was more about framework structured. I was not connecting. It was my way or highway. So I think that book allowed me to look beyond that, where I need to start to connect with people. I am a firm believer, or I think as I grew into maturity, or I'm growing into maturity, I felt at some point of time, 50, 100 years ago, the process was very important. How a factory runs their process is very important based on their productivity. Product was very important at that stage. And then we moved into process, identifying better processes to work. So if we did not have a good product, that company would have failed regardless of product or process we have in place. But we moved into process. And that's where agility comes in. That's where, mind shift comes in. That's where Scrum and Safe and Kanban comes in. Lean Agile comes in. But I really feel if we do not move from the process to people, we may not able to survive. And I think that this book allowed me to an opportunity where to connect to people versus just taking them as a framework or a process.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, today's Tuesday, and we talk about the book that we are helping to publish called Shift from Product to People, that kind of focuses exactly on that message, right? It's connecting with people and connecting to people that makes the difference. All right. Thank you for that recommendation. We'll put the link on the show notes as usual for people to go and find that book by John Maxwell. Until now, we turn our attention to teams and how sometimes they become their own worst enemy. So we want you to focus on a team that you were working with and to walk us through those small behaviors, those small steps that ultimately led to a problem in that team. So tell us that story.
Kickstarted a new team several years ago. I was hired the second person into that initiative after the product owner or the program manager at that stage. And I was fortunate to be part of the hiring, putting together the team, the framework. As we went into our second quarter, we did our agile training, Scrum training, we had team agreement, lot of thing was going well. There was a lot of support from the leadership. And going into the second and third quarter, team started holding on to what they learned initially. And everything they learned initially, or a lot of things they learned initially, they agreed upon, or their understanding was this is the best practice. I'll give you an example of stand-up. They will time box it to exact 15 minutes, and they will show frustration is going over 15 minutes if it's just by a couple of minutes. They had an agreement. User story need to come into a refinement. That user story need to have at least a description, couple of acceptance criteria. Anything less than that, they would not even entertain to discuss that user story at the refinement. So they became very best practice focus versus improvement focus. And that's where we had to undo some of the stuff what I did initially, where I started understanding or explaining or talking to the team about, I moved away from calling or taking a term best practice. I think it's a very challenging word. We use it very lightly. What is a best practice today may not be the best practice tomorrow. So I started going to the term and using the term better practice or better approach. Best can be only one. However, we can have multiple better approaches. So I think so that undoing part took the teams a little longer. That's where we came into the retros. We made the retro effective. We took the Kaizen culture. We talked about if we leave the retro with one actionable item, we are making progress.
So, one of the things that comes to mind is this concept that in order for us to be good at what we do, we need to know what's the best way to do it. And you already mentioned it. The best way to do it is completely contextual, right? It fits today's context. That's the best way to do it. But tomorrow, something might change. And from that moment on, then maybe something else is the best practice. You talked about better practice and then later on talked about continuous improvement, and of course that's what we want to get our teams to, right? This ability to accept that today's best is not tomorrow's best, it's just today's best, and then tomorrow we'll find better, right? What were the things you tried and how were you able to bring the team to understand that difference between what today is the best may not be tomorrow the best? Like, how did you help the team get to that state?
I think so. The conversation initially we started having as a team is saying that yes, Scrum provides a framework, which is a great start for a team. And then we look back and say, did we do everything what Scrum Guide suggested at the beginning? And everybody agreed and said no. I said, okay, then how did we improve? We learned, we improve. Now we came to a stage where yes, Scrum Guide suggests a lot of this fact. It time boxed you to 15 minutes of stand up, but it doesn't end there. If a conversation need to continue for a couple of minutes, we don't want it open ended, but we can put that item on the parking lot and people who need to stay on the call stays back on the call instead of scheduling another meeting. To make the life easier for people or the team to work together. Not to take it as a rule book.
Yeah, don't take Scrum as a rule book. In fact, that's a very good point because the core idea of Scrum is that it helps teams to get better, right? It's the inspect and adapt cycle. So obviously the goal of Scrum is to become obsolete, right? Is to not be needed because the team discovers their own practices.
That's correct.
And I'm sure that the team was perhaps anxious, maybe even afraid of changing things from what they did before, especially if they were successful, right? Like, why would we change? We were successful. How did you help them overcome that anxiety or fear of trying different things later on?
Yes, I think it's a combination of both what you said. I think it's the keyword what you said. They felt they're succeeding. They're getting the praise. They feel getting work is getting done. They're delivering what they're committing. Why make the changes? Why even make any changes to it and experiment with it something new? And it goes back to talking to them and creating that Kaizen culture. As we started putting enforcement on the retro, we are saying that okay, if we do not make any improvement, we cannot sit down at retro and everybody agree to everyone. Challenge was to get that team to disagree. One thing I have learned, and I try my best to communicate with the team members I serve or organization I serve, disagreement doesn't have to be disrespectful. But if we do not disagree, we do not challenge each other. If we do not challenge each other, we do not improve. Breaking that, the love between the team members, where they need to say, hey, I love you, but at the same time, you know what? To help you improve, I need to challenge you. Getting out of that phase where they're comfortable challenging each other. That was the toughest part. Once we got above that, beyond where team members started questioning each other, will I say they reached a space where they were 100% comfortable? No, but there's some team member started taking their initiative and speaking up more, challenging each other, and eventually that they were able to let go of those some of the cultural hangovers.
In fact, we've talked a lot about the 5 dysfunctions of a team here on the podcast. And one of the aspects, the second level in the pyramid, is this fear of conflict. And you were talking about challenging each other, but it really is the ability to have constructive conflict is a great asset for a team.
That's correct.
That was a great story and also a great reminder that sometimes discomfort for the Scrum Master, i.e., conflict between the team members, is important for the teams to be able to evolve. Thank you for sharing that, Tanzil.
You're welcome, Vasco.
Tuesday is Team Day here on the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. But tomorrow we talk about something that goes beyond the work we do with the teams. We will talk about how to lead change and what our guests have learned from leading and participating in change programs during their career. See you tomorrow. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.